Well, I would like to start by welcoming everyone to the GOS applicant webinar session. I am Tramice Carter. I am the Director of Community Investment here at the Foundation. I'm joined by Santrell Mitchell, who is our Community Investment Associate. I do want to inform you that today's webinar will be recorded and we will share the recording out to everyone after the meeting. If you have any questions, please drop those in the chat. And at the end of the call, we will answer any questions that you may have. So in 2021, Central Carolina Community Foundation began awarding general operating support grants. General operating support grants provide unrestricted multi-year support to eligible nonprofits. And with these funds, it is our hope that the nonprofits that we are able to support will be able to respond to the needs of their community in a faster and more efficient way, in a more effective way. Nonprofits will receive $10,000 annually if funded for a total of 3 years, which totals $30,000. And our general operating support grants are made possible through the Central Carolina Community and Foundation Community Impact Fund and other field of interest funds at the foundation as needed. So there are several objectives of the General Operating Support Grant. The first one is to invest in communities that have been historically underinvested in philanthropy, to provide resources to organizations that are trusted by, connected to, and rooted in community, to cultivate a trusting relationship between the foundation and nonprofit organizations within our 11 county service area, and then to increase nonprofit organizations' capacity to serve their community and sustain high quality services beyond the 3-year grant period. We hope that the funds not only are an asset to the nonprofits that receive funding, but once again, we want to build relationships with nonprofits and hopefully connect them to other opportunities even beyond the foundation. So, what we fund, the nonprofits who apply will be selected based on the following criteria. And if you hadn't had a chance to look at the application yet, when you get into the application, you will see that some of the questions will align to this criteria. But one, alignment with Central Carolina Community Foundation's missions, values, and priorities, connection to and representation by the community that your nonprofit is serving, proven outcomes in addressing your identified community need, the opportunity to increase your nonprofit's capacity, and in a history of collaborative work and a history of philanthropy. So the eligibility requirements for this year's grant have been updated somewhat, and you will see that with the annual organization budget increasing from last year. But the first thing is that your nonprofit would need to have had its 501c3 status for at least 2 years. So your determination letter should be dated no later than January 31st, 2024. An annual organization budget of under $650,000, and that's looking at your last fiscal year. At least one paid employee who dedicates a minimum of 20 hours a week to the organization. Once again, this is a paid employee, so it's not a contractor, but someone who is a hired employee of the organization. Someone who is an organization who has applied for and received a grant from the foundation in the past 4 years. And an easy way to determine that is by going on our grant portal. And if you have had a grant that's in the grant portal that dates from July the 1st, 2022 to present, and that's looking at your grant start date. So anything from July 2022 to present. A physical location based on the EIN address in one of our 11 counties, and then being registered on Midlands Gives. We know that the registration on the Midlands Gives site is currently closed. However, if you need to register when it opens back up in February, that's fine. You can go ahead and complete the application. But definitely, if your organization is selected, you would need to have completed the process and be on Midlands Gives before moving forward with this grant. So that's one of them when you're filling out the application. If your organization hasn't been able to register yet, don't worry about that particular thing, but definitely when that site opens back up or when the registration opens back up in February, being able to complete that registration. So now we'll talk a little bit more about the application and what you will find when you access the application. It's designed not to be burdensome. The questions in the application should be, if your organization does an annual report, should be some of the things that you're finding in that annual report or information that's readily available that you would just need to pull together. So it's designed not to be burdensome. We only take online submissions through the grant portal for the GOS grant, and you can find that on our website. On the GOS webpage, that apply button will take you directly to the portal. And then next, we want you to answer the questions thoughtfully, but remembering to be clear and concise. Try not to use too much jargon, and just remember this from the perspective of the reviewer. So making sure that your responses are clear, concise, and thoughtful, and then being mindful of the character limits and the word count with the application. If you do go over those, you won't be able to submit, and you will get an error message regarding that. So if an organization is awarded a general operating support grant, here are the expectations of the grantee. One is to expense the funds annually. So it will be a $10,000 award per year for the 3 years, but the funds will need to be expensed each year before receiving the next installment. And this is not a programmatic grant. The thought is that this would be used to support your organization in an administrative way, or your operations to better carry out your mission. So the funds are not for programmatic expenses. Nonprofits get to determine how to use the funds. Your budget does not need to be approved by the foundation. However, you will report out on how you use the funds. Complete an annual report that will be assigned in the grant portal, and that just gives updates on your organization over the course of the 3 years. Attend quarterly grantee meetups. Every 3 months, we have a grantee meetup for all the general operating support grants. We also have some organizations that have completed their 3 years and they still come back to the in-person meetups. So that's another reason why it's really important to have that staff person, because there is some time spent on this grant outside of just the funding. Being registered on the Midlands Gives and having a profile that's active, using the funds once again towards your operations and administrative costs, and then maintaining regular communication with the foundation staff. General operating support grants really allow us to work better or deeper with the nonprofits we serve. So being able to be open and communicate regularly with the CCCF staff. So when you start the application, there'll be a series of questions asking you to confirm your eligibility. Those are the things I went through a moment ago with the eligibility of the application. So having your nonprofit status, applying for and receiving a grant. And once again, the general operations support grant, when we look at sort of our continuum of funding, it's really to support organizations that have somewhat of a relationship with the foundation. We are somewhat aware of your programming. You have a reporting relationship with you, because it's really us saying, we know your work to a degree. We trust your work. You've been a good partner, and we are investing additional into your organization. So that's why those parameters are there. That one staff paid person, the updated Midlands Gives profile. And once again, that's one, if you need to wait until the site registration reopens in February, you can go ahead and complete the application. That 11 county service area EIN, and then your previous year fiscal annual budget is under the $650,000. The next part of the application, you will provide organizational information. And this is where you tell us a little bit more about your organization. So your primary service area, you'll share your website, mission statement. And here we want your official mission statement. So being sure, this is one of the questions that is pulled over from your candidate profile, but just making sure it's your organization's official mission statement. This project name for general operating support grants, you can just put GOS FY26. That will be an instruction on the application. The county of your physical location of your nonprofit, the population you serve by county, and it's really where you have a measurable impact. So, thinking broadly of where your impact is, those are the counties you would want to include. And then your number of both full-time and part-time staff. Once again, this does not include contracted work or anything like that, but it's staff of your organization. So in the next part, you'll be given space to add up to 4 key project services of your organization. We have an example here for you. Every application is going to require you to include at least one. Once again, if you have an annual report, this is a great place to start. So you will start by entering the name of the project or service, and then you will provide a 2 to 3 sentence summary. And then you will briefly describe the past year's outcome. So this example, Triple P is the name of the project, Positive Parenting Program. And then it offers practical strategies for parents to manage their children's behavior. And then it tells you the number of children and the number of families that was served in the last annual year. This was borrowed from Children's Trust, but that's just an example of how you can list your project and service if you want to provide a little additional detail, but you'll see there the character count for this question. And thinking about your key projects and services at your nonprofit. So some additional information is the client description. So you will provide the demographics of the primary populations you serve through your nonprofit. You will give a list of your key community partners. You will answer questions about your board, and that question is, in what ways do your staff and board reflect the community you serve? So this goes back to the idea of nonprofits being rooted in community and connected in community. So how does your board and staff reflect the community that you serve? The community need. So you're sharing with us what is the need that your nonprofit is addressing, and how does your organization determine this as a need? So it could be like a needs assessment or a larger state plan that you may be working from, but how did you determine this is a need in the community? Organizational opportunity. Here we're asking you to describe up to 2 potential growth opportunities for your organization over the next 1 to 3 years. And then an accomplishment. What is your organization's proudest moment in the past year? And then the last one is somewhat of a fun question I enjoy reviewing. What are 3 words that your community or clients will use to describe your organization? So those are just questions. Once again, this is not a program grant where you're describing a program. This is really funding based on your organization and supporting your organization to carry out its mission. So this is here, you're just telling us about overall your organization. The next section of the application is the financial statement. It will be based off your previous fiscal year. And I know many of us are on different calendars, so whatever your previous fiscal year is, you'll start by adding the total income, and then you will add your annual expenses. And then there is the income breakdown, so you will add those numbers, and then the totals will calculate for you at the bottom. But all of your federal funding, you would put the amount, and you would have to calculate the percent, but the totals will total for you at the bottom. Financial statement. Next, you will enter your organization's expenses. So the amount spent on personnel, programs, fundraising, and then general and administrative. Calculate those total percentages, and then the sum will be provided for you at the bottom. So it's from the previous fiscal year. And then there's a question about major donors. Your organization should determine what's considered a major donor. And at that question, in that section of the application, you could give a bulleted list of those major donors. The application is asking for 2 uploaded documents, and I'll go through some examples of those. So one document is your staffing structure, and then the other is a list of your board members in their occupations. This is not the format that you have to use, but an example. Hopefully, once again, not designed to be burdensome. Hopefully, this is something your nonprofit already has created. But here's an example of a staffing structure for a nonprofit. And then next is just a table with a list of board members, what their occupation is, and then their term. Towards the end of the application, you will be asked, is there any additional information you would like to add to your application? I think here's an opportunity if there are any highlights you want to share. And I know a lot of the questions are based off of your previous fiscal year. So if you had any major changes, or for example, if you didn't have much for personnel, but then you now have someone that's working 20 hours a week and you want to sort of give that explanation of why that wasn't in last year's budget, because maybe that's a new role or something like that. Anything additional that you think is really needed to support the application, if there were major changes or anything else like that. You can include that in the additional information section. And then we ask, how long did it take you, the total of hours to complete this application? So the review process, applications are due January 31st. And then there is an initial staff vetting and review of the applications. And then our General Operating Support Review Committee will do their review applications and of the applications, and then invite applications for the round 2 interview. You'll be notified about March 18th of your application status for the next round of the General Operating Support. Interviews with the review committee will be on April 1st. The full day is blocked, so we asked you to go ahead and save that date. Nonprofits typically bring 2 people with them to participate in the interview. So it's probably the executive director or a board member, or maybe your lead staff program person or something like that. So April 1st, the interviews typically are about 15 minutes. Our committee will be here in person, and you will join the interview virtually. So you'll get about a 15-minute time slot when it's time for interview day. And then by April 17th, you will be notified if your organization was selected. And then the funding period will begin June 1st, 2026 for the General Operating Support Grants for the FY26 round. Here is my contact information and the rest of our team here in the Community Investment Department. Also, be sure to follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If you did not receive the nonprofit newsletter, you can sign up to receive our nonprofit newsletter. And then here's my phone number, once again, email address, if you have any additional questions to ask about the application.